It's May 13, 2024. I'm going to be updating you every week with whenever I change something little in my mixing and mastering. But this week was crazy because I didn't think that's the problem when it came to clippers. And I was stubborn and I didn't want to believe something I saw a friend of mine, Drew Vespers, put out. And I was wrong about that. But also I'm going to show you something I'm doing with compressors, which is just fun. It's a little tweak to my TDR Katalnikov workflow. So let's jump into it. So with clippers, what happened last week? Drew Vespers put out a video on oversampling with clippers, and I didn't want to believe it, and I couldn't believe it because it wasn't happening to me. And what was happening to him was when he oversampled his hard clippers, or when there's a ceiling, the oversampling algorithm would increase the peak value when it dropped down in samples. Now, it wasn't happening all the time for me, but now I've figured out it actually does happen sometimes, and I can explain why. So what I've got here is I've got a mix here by surname ampersands. That's the name of the track. And if I go to the very highest peak, okay, and this is where things start to get interesting, okay, I'm going to zoom all the way in. Okay, if we zoom, perfect, we're there. All right, now, there are only two samples, so that peak level there, if I go to waveform stats, is at 0.1, okay, that's at 0.1 of a decibel. But those two samples, about up to 5, actually if we go up to this top one here, those two samples are 6 decibels difference, but before it hits that next peak just on the right hand side there of the waveform. So if I set my clip at a negative 0.5, it should just clip there. So what we're going to do is we're going to pretend we're oversampling. So, and I'll show you why this is just so crazy. So we're going to resample this up. So we're going to do 4 times oversampling. It's going to sample up, which is great. More fidelity, no aliasing distortion. But this is where things get funny, and where are we? The clipper, I need the plugin. Let's get this up. We're going to clip it with no oversampling, so it's just 1 times oversampling, and we'll render, okay? So far, you're going to see the peak level be at, what's it going to be at? -6. That's good. That's great. But then inside here, when you're oversampling and then re-downsampling, when you go back to go to 48, that peak level, that should be -6. Take a look at what happens to it, okay? Because it has to introduce this low-pass filter, it actually flicks it out. And then what's our new peak level? -5. So this by adding oversampling here, okay, I just emulated that oversampling by putting the resampling algorithms between the processes. You actually increase the peak value of hard clipping. But this, I didn't believe. And the reason why I didn't believe it is because it wasn't happening in my masters. And there's a reason why it wasn't happening in my masters. It's because the masters I was working on at the time, the top end wasn't super harsh. This only happens with very intermittent peaks that are very high frequency, because this filter here, okay, this oversampling and downsampling filter uses a low pass, and the low pass only rotates the phase of very high frequency. Right, so now let's take a look at it. No oversampling, and we can look at the peak value over here. That's the sample peak value.
I've been on a long trip through the up and down, and me feel like a no-show when life is a both and I can't.
Now let's have a look at what happens when I enable oversampling. Alright, now we're starting to get some peaks over 6. 5.5, that's half a decibel louder. Okay, what if we put, and this is where we can have a bit of fun, we put a low pass filter before the clipper. What happens to those peaks when they're oversampled? Perfect, it disappears. So what this actually shows is that oversampling is introducing new samples in the high end when the peaks have a lot of high end information. Now, what does that mean I've been doing in my sessions? So for the most part, I've kept oversampling, okay? For the most part, I've kept oversampling because there are very specific circumstances when I have a lot of peak information in the top end, like high frequency peak information. But for the most part, the mix is coming in a pretty controlled there. And when I'm oversampling, it's not producing new sample peaks louder than the ceiling I'm setting on the clipper. That said, when I do have very sporadic high frequency peaks coming through and it's causing my oversampling algorithm to create new sample peaks above the clipped level, that's when I choose to either go to 1 times oversampling, or I'll remain at 4 times oversampling and try introducing low pass filters in the top end if they can be gentle enough to mitigate the amount of high frequency content causing those overs, or I just stick with 1 times oversampling. So that's one thing I'm doing here. That's an updated sort of revision to my clipping technique. It's a very subtle thing. This is like 0.005% of a change to my workflow. But nonetheless, it's still a change that I want to share with you, because as I learn information, I want to be helping you guys out, sharing information with you. And you'll even find more information if you're part of my newsletter. You can subscribe to that down in the link below. It's the best newsletter for working audio pros. Now I've sort of given my little spiel there. Now, compressors. What am I doing different? This is TDR Katalnikov. Funny story before I show you what I'm doing different here. They had the Gentleman's Edition on sale. I bought it like a month ago or 2 months ago whenever it was on sale. I haven't even installed it because I'm still using the free version. It's that good. So if you don't have TDR Katalnikov, make sure you download it. I've even got my presets here. You can get them if you're part of the newsletter. But what I'm focusing on here is this peak crest, because there's 2 detection passes, a peak and an RMS detection circuit, and you can offset the peak threshold. So if you bring this positive, more positive, it lifts the threshold so it only captures the very top peaks. Otherwise, you bring it down and it becomes more aggressive on the peak detection circuit, the way it compresses. And you can got little indicators here that dictate that. The reason why I've been fiddling with this more is we'll go into the delta signal. This song, this is more for demonstrative purposes, but with electronic tracks, I've been pulling the peak down, so it's pumping a little bit more with the transients, and you get a cool movement. I'll set up an A and a B and then level match it all, because when you hear it, you'll be like, oh wow, this is actually really cool what you can do. Otherwise, what I'm doing is I'm pulling this peak crest up. Well, usually it's around there and like -2, and I'm allowing the vocals or the main RMS to gel the track, almost like SSL style compression, where it just glues everything as it moves through the macro dynamics of the master. But we'll dial in 2 versions, a peak pumping and an RMS moving one, level match, and you'll get to hear and feel how that changes the sound. Oh, I listen to the delta when I move this. So I'll listen to the delta and move this, and then I'll also monitor those release indicators there.
Only 'cause I make it a long trip through the up and down and me feel like a no-show. When life is a both and I can't take that duality. It's a mystery. Is it really or is it only? Only 'cause I make it a long trip through the up and down and me feel like a no-show. When life is a both and I can't take that duality. It's a mystery. Is it really or is it only? Only 'cause I make it a long trip through the up and down and me feel like a no-show. When life is a both and I can't take that duality. It's a mystery.
Okay, beautiful. So what I basically set up here is this A version. It's pretty much just peak compressing, and you hear it in the bass. It pumps a little bit. It's not really for this style, but it's just a nice tool to have when you're working on electronic music and you want to have a little bit of movement, especially when you're driving something loud. You don't want it to feel like it's just brick walled. You want the compression to sort of move with the music a bit. And then the B version is probably what I'd end up choosing on a final master, just because it allows the drums to open up a bit more and the vocals to sort of drive the gelling through this passage. So take a listen to the A and the B.
You're all for it, you know. I've been on a long trip through the up and down and me feel like a no-show. When life is a both and I can't.
And when I switch it over to the B version, it's going to feel a lot more open.
Is it really or is it only? Only 'cause I make it that way. When life is a both.
So yeah, that's just something I've been playing around with the TDR Katalnikov, that peak and crest factor. So anyway, I hope you really enjoyed that. And I'll be back more with next week. Anything I've changed up at the studio, whether it's mixing or mastering, I'll share it with you. And until next time, take care.